Thanks for tuning into another edition of Another Dolphins podcast. And for the first time in 2024, we would like to wish you all a wonderful Victory Monday. Joshua Houtz, the Miami Dolphins beat the Atlanta Falcons 20-13. How you feeling today?
I'm feeling wonderful, Jake. You mentioned it. We're 1-0 and football's back, and it feels like everything's right in the world, right? We go through all those months just waiting for it to come back. It's finally here. I'm as good as I can be, Jake. It's on top of the world right now. 1-0. How are you feeling?
Was able to put the feet up. Sadly, we had to watch whatever the Mike White experience is these days. It's something that I've never seen before, but that's something we had to deal with. But Josh, the game was wonderful. It was great getting to watch Dolphins football. By the middle of the second quarter, I was ready to turn it off. That's preseason football. But even earlier than that, man, were you dealing with the preseason audio issues? Because that was brutal up here.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it almost seems like sometimes when I come on here and do a podcast, right? And I notice the kids are on there, they're swiping on their iPads or something, and everything just kind of frees up. It sounded terrible, man. I mean, at least the feed was still up. At least we were able to watch the game. But whatever noises were coming out of that CBS studio, it was no bueno. So they definitely had to fix that thing up. And I do think it went on for the entire game.
They were conjuring monsters. I think someone was kind of comparing it. I wish I wrote this down. As on Twitter, one of those old like ray guns that kids had in the 90s, early 2000s, and it'd make like some sort of noises that seemed to follow it. It just would hang on to every single vowel, it seemed like, and it'd get really loud and obnoxious. But outside of that, Josh, that was probably my biggest complaint from the game. Before we get into some of our favorite players, I thought it was really interesting. Greg Allman on Twitter, he posted some numbers. He went through some of the players that were held out by each team. And now this was only about halfway through the preseason, but some of the teams that left out a lot of players would start with the Falcons. When they played the Dolphins, they were without 26 players. The Ravens were without 28 players. Lions, 31 players. Panthers, 36 players. And then there was the Dolphins. Now, don't forget, we're working with a 90-man roster here. 40 of them, 40 were inactive for the first preseason game. Josh, is it a reason to panic, or are we looking at a scenario here where Mike McDaniel gets more value out of the joint practices?
I think a lot of it just goes now to, how important they view these joint practices, right? We see the Dolphins doing one with each of their preseason opponents. You get to see kind of how they adjust from day to day. So I think a lot of it has to do with the way the preseason is changing. But to hear that number, I mean, that just goes to tell you how important some of these players are to this Dolphins roster and how they're trying to, for lack of a better word, bubble wrap them as the season gets closer. So I have no issues with this. And hopefully, the players are ready for once the season starts, because that would be the only, issue that might come up, right? A little bit of rust because they're not out there, but nothing to worry about. These guys are pros.
That was kind of the thing up here living in the Northeast for the last 20 years with the Patriots run, right? That was kind of Bill Belichick's thing. September was still the preseason. Like, there were those years the Dolphins would start out 3-1 because of Deion Sims catching a touchdown in the back of the end zone against like the Atlanta Falcons. The Pats would be like 1-3, but it'd be like 5 weeks later, 6 weeks later, and the Pats would just be really cooking. It was kind of interesting, Josh, when you break out those numbers. Let's say 30 locks from the 40 that didn't play. Let's say 30 were guys that are going to make the roster, whether they're guaranteed starters, whether there's someone like Chop Robinson and Mo Kamara, guys who I was pretty excited to see. But to your point, Mike McDaniel came out and said it was a situation where Chop Robinson probably could have gone. At the same time, for a guy to get his first NFL outing under, he was battling through some stuff. It was a coach's decision that was minor injury related, but he should be back soon. So there are those clear scenarios where Mike McDaniel's taking it a little slow and letting the process play out.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm all for that. If we had some of our starters out there and something, God forbid, happens, I mean, we'll talk about the injury to Keon Smith. Something like that happens to a Tua Tagovailoa. You're starting Austin Jackson, Tyreek Hill. I hate them even speaking this into existence, but that's why you make sure you bubble wrap these guys. So to hear that they left Chop Robinson, I think that was a guy that, Jake, we both had on our list. I know I had him at 3. I think you may have as well. But at first when I heard that, I thought, okay, they got some tricks up their sleeve, and this dude's going to be a big part of that defense, what they come out there with week 1. So hopefully he's back out there. Hopefully it's nothing serious. And again, a testament to just how different this roster is compared to years before when we were out there. Almost every position was a battle, and these guys were trying to fight. We have our stars. There's no reason with risking any sort of injury.
There are some injuries that we're going to have to start to follow. Josh mentioned it. Keon Smith tore his ACL. He's done for the year. He was Cat was a big fan of him. He thought he had some potential as a tackle. The Dolphins were working more at left guard this year, and I believe that's where he was when he got injured. And on top of that, Aaron Brewer, he's banged up with a hand injury. He's expected to be week to week. Josh, the offensive line, I think it's just going to be this way for the entire year. You know, we go back to last year, so many different combinations along the offensive line. Same thing in 2024, it's looking like.
Groundhog's Day, is that what they say? I mean, I'm hoping it's not. I'm hoping something happens here. It's definitely a blow to Keon Smith because, like you mentioned, Cat was stoked about him. They were experimenting with him at guard, but someone has to rise up, and we did see a little bit of promise out of Jack Driscoll and some of those other guys last night. So, intrigued to see what Butch Barry does, right? We sit there and hashtag in Butch Barry we trust. This is why he's getting paid those big bucks. Let's see how many posted notes it takes to get this offensive line ripe throughout the entire regular season, because that's the biggest thing, right? It doesn't matter who comes out starting week 1 at 2. The Dolphins are lining up out there January, December, and later in the year that we're truly invested in.
Couldn't agree more. So with guys like Chop Robinson and Kamara sidelined, who's going to step up? Who's going to take advantage of that opportunity with both Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb sidelined? There's going to be a situation where some of these guys can really grab hold of a roster spot here, one of the starting 53 spots. Quentin Bell, Josh, was one of those names. He won the orange jersey, and he was on my list. He was number 5 of guys who I was really excited to see play in the game. Former 7th-round pick. He's been around the league for a while, drafted in 2019. He's been on 4 or 5 different teams, and when you see that type of hype in camp, you get real jealous as someone living out of state, and you really zone in on those guys and you focus on them. I was a little disappointed to see he played only 15 snaps. He finished the game with 1 tackle, and he was just one of 2 players labeled as an edge last night. And Josh, I think Grayson Murphy was the one edge that really stood out and made us think, all right, I think we might be onto something here.
Yeah, Murphy's a guy you were pretty stoked about. He did that nice little spin, got a tackle in the backfield, and you're like, oh, man, this guy's flashing. And then I think he got banged up. I think someone said he had like a compression sleeve or something on his leg. But Quentin Bell, I mean, again, that's that feel-good story. Like you mentioned, we're up here in the Northeast, and we're just really going based off of, the articles we're reading or some of the tweets that we see. And a lot of the hype has been around Bell. We know how important it was for him to go up against his, a former team. Hopefully, that's a position that the Dolphins start to get some guys back. But to see Grayson Murphy step up and then immediately, be taken out of the game, it definitely sucked. And you did mention the 15 snaps for Bell. Surprisingly, I think he played 25 on special teams. So this is a guy that does seem like he's going to be around. And, they definitely are going to need him early in the season, like we mentioned with the injuries to Phillips and Chubb.
Now, it's the first week of the preseason. There are games still going on. We're recording this on Sunday, but it was kind of nice to see the Dolphins weren't at the bottom of the special teams ratings when you go on to Pro Football Focus. They were middle of the pack. That was exciting. So that's interesting about Bell, and that's something to keep an eye on.
Did you like the kickoff? How were your thoughts on the kickoff? I mean, I don't want to spiral too out of control, but it seemed indifferent, right? I mean, it seemed like it all was more dangerous than what we were accustomed to with these guys just going, full speed into this pile of players. But we'll see.
Yeah. It did kind of have that vibe to it, but I also think we're at a spot where nobody's going to show anything, where I think if you're telling Jason Sanders just to squib it, and let's say in the preseason you're giving up an extra 10 yards compared to in the regular season, but it means you aren't showing anything or how you're going to try to kick it. I think that's kind of what we saw there, because nothing really stuck out too much.
Yeah, and to your point, I mean, I think we talked about how Berrios was listed on there, Achane, so they didn't even have those guys out there. But we did see a little bit of Malik Washington. So, yeah, it was interesting to see, and I think Danny Crossman had a quote where he's like, we might still be experimenting with this thing into the first few weeks of the season. So, definitely a thing that we have to get used to as fans. Can't imagine what those players have to get accustomed to after all those years of, it becoming so routine.
What'd you think of Malik Washington? He had a spicy end around for 21 yards. However, 1 of 4 through the air, just 5 yards receiving. He looked incredibly small. I thought you could tell right away that he's 5'8", 5'9", in that range. But I'm really interested to see how Mike McDaniel can get him the football, because you see that spark, that flash he has with the ball in his hand.
Yeah, and I think I maybe prematurely, threw out the Jarvis Landry comparison, but I may as well stick to it, right? I mean, Jarvis Landry wasn't the fastest player, but we saw him returning kicks. We saw with Malik Washington. We knew he was that primary slot guy. That seems to be Malik Washington's role, and we see him being a little bit of that dog, right? You see Malik Washington running hard with the football. Mm-hmm. Everyone talks about his running back frame, and we saw him coming out of nowhere. I think it was on Jalen Wright's 6-yard touchdown run and just, lighting someone up. So that's what you want to see. You want to see these guys have the dog in them. So I was very excited about what I saw to Malik Washington. I wrote an article for the Finsider, and I talked about all the players, and we talk about all the time, Jake, the Isaiah Fords, the Lynn Bowdens, the Preston Williams, the list goes on and on of players, receivers mostly, that I've been hyped about. Malik Washington seems to be the real deal, and I'm intrigued to see, not so much what he does this year, which it does seem like he could have a role, but maybe, later down the road when you need him to come in and be that primary wide receiver 3 with Barrios elsewhere, Odell Beckham Jr. or something like that. So, yeah, man, I was pretty hyped for what Malik Washington brings. Run out there and pick him up in fantasy if you haven't already.
Jalen Waddle, he didn't play. Braxton Berrios, you just mentioned it, he didn't play. Odell Beckham Jr., he's yet to practice. So you're looking at, the second string wide receivers. River Craycraft continues to be awesome. He had some great blocks in the preseason game. Josh, where are you going to put Malik Washington on the depth chart? Do you think he's kind of leapfrog guys like Willie Snead and maybe like an Anthony Schwartz at this point?
I would hope so. And I think I don't have the depth chart. I don't have the depth chart up, but I know he was pretty far down there. So I don't see him leapfrogging River Craycraft, which I believe right now is pretty much, I was going to say he's wide receiver 4. So where Barrios? Barrios would be, I guess, wide receiver 5. So I guess Malik Washington would be my wide receiver 6, but I could absolutely see him leapfrogging Barrios potentially. And, I threw that name out there as someone that Dolphins may have interest in trading. I don't know what his contract situation is, but, his biggest thing is being able to return to football. So are they seeing what Malik Washington can do here to, maybe I don't think the Dolphins could do that right now with their wide receiver room. But, yeah, wide receiver 6 right now. Do you have any higher than that, Jake?
No, I don't think you can go any higher. Would you be able to trust him? And that's kind of when you get into the conversation here too. If you need him week 2, week 3, because for the times we see Mike McDaniel say that, all right, Aaron Brewer, he's week to week, and we feel like, all right, cool, maybe, we'll see him start for the regular season. There are other times where he speaks about injuries, and I completely understand not wanting to put someone on a timeline, say, hey, we're expecting back here and the pressure that creates. But God, man, when you hear absolutely nothing about someone like Odell Beckham, it's just so hard to not just fear the worst. It's going to be something like, all right, hopefully we see him week 6 and the entire rest of the year, we're just going to be praying to God he doesn't re-injure something. And then that just devalues whatever he was going to bring to this team.
And that will be so Dolphins, right? We've waited all our life, I guess, for Odell Beckham Jr. to come here. I know Dolphin fans, there are probably so many graphics and tweets, celebrating the signing. Be so Dolphins, if you just, I don't even want to speak into existence. But yeah, man, you never know what to take with Mike McDaniel. So we hope that we see Aaron Brewer out there. We hope that we see an Odell Beckham Jr. out there. But can you rely on Malik Washington? After one game, I'm not sure you have that answered, but hopefully they do have their answer. These next few weeks of joint practices and then the remaining 2 games of preseason.
Josh, we're going to play a game called Do You Blame the Quarterback or the Wide Receiver? I'm going to read some stat lines for you, and I want to just kind of get your thoughts. When you see Kyrick McGowan targeted 6 times with 2 receptions, Malik Washington targeted 4 times, 1 reception, Willie Snead targeted 3 times, no receptions, Braylon Sanders targeted 4 times, no receptions, and Jawan Burton targeted 3 times, no receptions. Josh, do the Dolphins have a backup quarterback problem?
I'm not sure they do. I mean, I kind of slept on this. I was out there making all sorts of jokes, Skylar Thompson and Mike White are playing against the 85 Barrels and all Madden, whatever it is. But I mean, you mentioned it, man. They're throwing to receivers that are trying to make the roster, right? They're not out there with Tyreek Hill. They're not out there with Jalen Waddle. I don't know if we're going to ever see either of them out there with those type of guys. So you got to remember who they're throwing to. But I think, based on their performances, I think there's definitely something to watch. And I think we were intrigued to see what this QB2 battle brought with Skylar Thompson, Mike White. I mean, after that first game, I leaned towards Skylar. I wish he would have wore the visor, see if there was anything more there. But if either of these guys had to come in with Tua Tagovailoa, if God forbid goes down, which again, a lot of people just assume he's going to be healthy. This is a guy who hasn't only played one fully healthy season since, I believe, going back to college. So there could be that there could be a need for a QB2 to come in, and I would not trust Skylar Thompson or Mike White to keep this thing going. So I don't know if that's testament to, the offense and how it's built for Tua Tagovailoa or just how bad those guys are. But I know a lot of people were saying Ryan Tannehill's name after that, toe thumbs, things like that, Jake. Definitely something to watch. What are your thoughts? And do you blame the receivers or was it QB2?
Skylar Thompson threw 19 pass attempts. He completed 8 of them for 95 yards and a touchdown. And one really, really bad interception where he just threw it into an area. It seemed like there were 4 Atlanta Falcons just absolutely sitting there. And I was kind of agreeing with you that I feel Thompson is winning this battle. I don't know if you can spin zone Mike White being 4 for 14 for 26 yards, just that based on like some wide receivers are hoping to make the roster. Like Mike White, this is a guy who hucked a pick six when the Dolphins were up 35-14 against the Carolina Panthers and almost demolished a great parlay I won last year. Like Mike White was already on my shit list, but this is just one of those scenarios where it's just, can somebody be this like Camp? We didn't hear reports that he was this bad. Like we did not hear like 4 for 14 type bad. Like don't get me wrong, Miami beat writers deserve all the credit in the world because we haven't been seeing like the actual like stats from practices. I'm so thankful we're past that stage for the Dolphins. But man, like, could this be like a Mike McDaniel thing? Like the offense just doesn't work when you have someone like Mike White combined with Kyrick McDown, and then it would look a little better if it was Mike White to like a Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. Obviously, I think it looks slightly better, but man, like White's decision making in this Miami Dolphins offense has always just been so damn questionable.
Yeah, and I mean, this is a guy that was starting in the league at one point, right, for the Jets. So I mean, you would think he would do something more than those stats are putting up. I mean,
Is
again,
the
I
Jets
think
QB though? Do we like?
But God, man, he was bad. He was pretty bad. So I mean, we're all putting up the little toe thumbs. What's Ryan Tannehill up to? Does he want to come play and be the backup quarterback here in Miami? All jokes aside, this QB2 battle is definitely something to watch. And I think we kind of underplayed, how important this thing was heading into this. And when we saw them out there, I mean, like you mentioned, Skylar Thompson hucking one into triple, quadruple coverage, Mike White doing whatever he was doing. I mean, this team we knew would sputter if Tua Tagovailoa went down, but we've seen him pull out some games before. We thought maybe Mike McDaniel would have some magic in his hat. He's not going to show that in preseason, but God, man, definitely queasy.
Just hope for some like pitch and catches type things, like just something where it's just moving the football a little bit. But Josh, $35 million in available cap space. If you could pick up the phone and call Ryan Tannehill, Mike White's contract's $4 million. I mean, Jay Cutler started, I think that was a $10 million contract from the Dolphins. If you had to pay, let's say Ryan Tannehill $7-8 million to come in and be the backup, would you do that?
I guess. I'm sitting here thinking this, and I'm like, if Tua something happens, God forbid to him, the first person I'm calling is Tom Brady. He owes us. So I maybe you wait and keep that money in the back pocket just in case you have to do the unthinkable. But Ryan Tannehill would be a huge upgrade over these guys. I wish I had a list of backup quarterbacks available because I saw it and I was like, dude, this is pretty rough. So maybe save us Ryan Tannehill. You're our only hope for a suitable starter that could come in and, maybe play if we needed to.
I agreed with you. I thought he could kind of do the Mike McDaniel point and click, especially when he can create those windows to throw into. But man, I think we're kind of overvaluing the magic of Ryan Tannehill. Like he got beat out by Will Levis, rookie year Will Levis, just flat out benched. He was really struggling at times too, where he was great in that Titans offense where he could play under center a lot, and I trust him more if like in terms of like running the football, but in terms of an $8 million contract, would he improve the team that much? No. Would he be an upgrade over Skylar Thompson? Yes. How about this one, Josh? When you consider you got Aaron Brewer dealing with an injury, Keon Smith is done for the season. Isaiah Wynn, Mike McDaniel comes out and says, we'll give you an update when we have an update, which is so encouraging and so promising for a team that's just been brutal in terms of offensive line injuries. If you had to go out and sign one more guy, what's the more urgent need? Would it be that backup quarterback, someone like Ryan Tannehill, or would it be doing something to try to find a guard who maybe is on the roster or the bubble of a 53-man roster elsewhere, and maybe you push out like a 4th or a 5th round pick next year in order to bring him in?
Yeah, I think offensive line. I mean, you can't feel much better about the offensive line after what we saw. And again, I feel like if Tua goes down, this season's all for crap, right? I don't know unless you bring in a Tom Brady, you're not saving this thing. So I'm fine waiting and letting these two guys battle it out and see, who comes up and the winner in this. But yeah, definitely sure up that offensive line, whether it's a guard, the center spot. Yeah, I still cannot get Baldy, out of my head, just telling us that that's all I ever could think back to. And it makes me a little queasy. So yeah, man, offensive line, I definitely spend that money on.
But so what would you say just off the top, the tackle spots were probably that's probably it where we feel good about it. You have Tron Armstead, you have Austin Jackson, and Patrick Paulman. He I think he was one of PFF's highest graded players for the Dolphins. He looked great as well. So I mean, on the corners, it seems like that Dolphins offensive line might be famous last words, but looking pretty good.
Yeah, and I don't know if you're setting me up because I did have Patrick Paul on my list. He was number 5. I should have probably had him higher. And, we joke about that face mask, but that dude, went out there and dude, he looks so good. And I just don't know if it's because he was going up against, again, some of those were fringe 53-man roster guys. He played 63 of 68 snaps. And again, this was a guy that was drafted pretty high. So, he should be a little bit better than some of these guys he was going up against, but he looked really damn good, whether it was getting to the second level, whether it was just, walking guys downfield. I mean, we know he's a behemoth, but he went out there and played like an absolute monster. So I do think that I feel a lot better about that, the left tackle spot. And I do want to mention that, believe it was Patrick Paul mentioned that him and Jalen Wright were the future of this offense, because I think they were discussing how, a lot of Jalen Wright's big plays came behind Patrick Paul. So, when we almost are certainly going to lose Teron Armstead for a game or two based on history, having a guy like Patrick Paul back there, I mean, yes, we have Kendall Lamb too, but Patrick Paul looked damn good for a rookie.
I think when you look at Jalen Wright, that was probably my favorite player to watch, just because, one, it's so easy to follow a ball carrier, especially when he's getting in the backfield, out of the backfield. Two, dude, he looked so smooth. There's obviously some bias having him in dynasty football over here, but man, I believe, all right, Patrick Paul, I believe you. I'm ready to see, people forget, this offense has Tyreek Hill, it has Jalen Waddle. It's one of the best passing attacks in the entire offense, or entire NFL, excuse me. Mike McDaniel is a run game coordinator first. So when you see, after having a couple years in the system, and we're getting a little dramatic here, sure, but when you see game 1 of year 3 of the Mike McDaniel system, your 2 rookie draft picks, the fact that the scouting department all the way up to Chris Greer could identify those traits in that Mike McDaniel offense to come in and just pick it up right away and show some sort of success, hell yeah, dude. Hell yeah.
Yeah, you're ready to run through a wall, and it's just so much nicer than, waiting for, I don't want to knock on Eric Ezukama or, Cam Smith or Channing Tindall, which we probably got to talk about Channing Tindall at some point. But yeah, man, Jalen Wright and Patrick Paul exploded out the gate. And I mean, Patrick Paul is a guy a lot of people said needed to develop, needed to refine his tools. I mean, again, he was going up against some maybe lesser talented foes, but he looked absolutely awesome. And then Jalen Wright, Jake, we both have shares. I think we discussed on Twitter how we both need to probably get more shares after this. I mean, he looked absolutely awesome. 10 carries, 51 yards. He had that touchdown. I've written down 22 snaps. To me, he looked like a 3-down back, right? I mean, we love Devon Achane. We love what he can do, his speed, how explosive he is. But to think about, what we saw to Jalen Wright going between the tackles, the patience he showed, the vision. He has that speed too. I mean, I'm giddy excited. It feels like for the first time in a long time, the Dolphins not only have one, fantasy running back, but they have 2 long-term fantasy running backs. And I was going to say 3 if you're looking at redraft. And then it's just wild, man. So yes, I'm absolutely ecstatic for what this team can do from this backfield. And I need to admit that I said Jalen Wright might not have a huge role this year. I think I take that back, because I mean, how are you going to keep that off the field, man? He looked absolutely phenomenal.
Raheem Mostert played 50% of snaps last year. Devon Achane was about 28%. And that's something I'm really trying to struggle with, Josh. Redraft is a nice context to put it in, but how high can you value someone like Jalen Wright? How high up the list? Where is he going to finish with the Dolphins in terms of, does he get more carries than Devon Achane and Raheem Mostert? Would you really be surprised if it's a scenario where Devon Achane might see the field a little more often, but maybe a couple targets, maybe he gets in the run or as a receiver a little bit more, where that's how Wright could maybe make up some ground there if he's not on the field as much?
Yeah, man, I could definitely see that happening. I think the thing that you mentioned, the touches or the carries, I guess, could go to Jalen Wright, and we could see Devon Achane being more of that pass catcher. Another thing I really like about Jalen Wright that maybe we didn't necessarily see last on Friday was his ability as a pass blocker. I mean, that was something that really stood out in his college tape, getting him on the field on third downs. I mean, we saw him reverse field on that one catchy ball of the screen. I mean, so he can be a playmaker in the pass game as well. I mean, I know early on we saw Jeff Wilson getting some targets, and I was just thinking, dude, could you imagine if that was Achane in a regular game or even Jalen Wright? So, yeah, man, I'm excited, absolutely ecstatic for this backfield. And I think, again, this year heading into it, I think I have Achane a little bit higher as far as which one I'm. But again, I don't know, man. That had to be a PPR league, and now we're talking fantasy. Good problem to have, though, Jake, right? Good problem to have.
I wish I could find a way to divine where I'd take someone like Jalen Wright, but it's still so hard. So maybe that's something I'll try to digest over the next week or so. Josh, you mentioned Jeff Wilson Jr., and I don't want to be a hater, man. I really do not want to be a hater. But why Why are we throwing the ball to Jeff Wilson Jr.? One, he dropped the first one. I'm glad he got it back the second time in the redemption story. I think it was the first touchdown of the year he got to score on a reception on a little swing route. But I mean, Miami's rushing attack averaged 4 yards per carry despite the disaster, the panic that everyone has about the offensive line. But man, Jeff Wilson Jr., it's just 5 carries for 7 yards. It's just like a step slow. It just seems like just slightly out of, I don't know. It just does. The rhythm doesn't add up. It feels like.
Yeah, and I'm going to continue to say maybe they're trying to showcase what he can do and hope that a team calls to, take Jeff Wilson, because then he can maybe
failed there.
Yeah, it definitely. I saw that as it was taking place live. I'm like, well, you botched this, but he did have that touchdown, and he does. He is that veteran leader, so we'll keep hyping him up. But yeah, man, regular season, we do not want to see him running those quick underneath slants in the 5 wides or honestly any of this. I would much rather see Raheem Mostert, Devon Achane, and Jalen Wright at this point than Jeff Wilson, and that's no knock against him, because at one point we absolutely needed him to come in and carry the load when we were down pretty bad a couple years ago.
One name you haven't mentioned. How about Chris Brooks? Is Chris Brooks going to earn a spot on this roster, dude? 12 carries, 40 yards, just erasing defenders. Like, if you want to talk about some thunder that we've been begging this team to have since we've been doing a podcast together, Chris Brooks is thunder, man.
Yeah, he's a bowling ball. Was it Jared Dokes or something that was kind of built like this little Is it I was gonna say Gollum. That's not who the Pokemon is, right? That sounds like
Golem. I see Golem. I
Golem.
got you.
Yeah, Gollum. I'm in Lord of the Rings with my terrible pronunciation. But yeah, you see who I'm thinking. Yeah, man, he looks like he could be that little bulldozer, that little, quote unquote muscle hamster that we've seen before. So I might rather keep him than Jeff Wilson at this point. So let's keep using Jeff Wilson in preseason, bump that stock up, and hopefully we can keep around a Chris Brooks. Because let's be honest, if Jeff Wilson's on this roster, you're probably not keeping 5 running backs and Alec Ingold. So, Chris Brooks, man, keep running that ball hard, because that's that thunder we've been calling for a very, very long time.
I'd love a scenario where I don't know if it's entirely possible, where I don't know if Jeff Wilson can be one of the guys you keep on the practice squad, but I don't know if Chris Brooks would be someone who lasts to get back on the practice squad. And I don't know if it's someone you'd want to even risk something like that. The Dolphins have invested a couple years into him, and I think he's ran the ball really hard. It's something unique about this roster. And don't get me wrong, I completely understand what Jeff Wilson brings to this game. He's the jack of all trades. You can line him up in the slot, and a lot of the time he's going to catch the football and help you move the sticks. But it just seems like Chris Brooks, whether it's his ability to erase dudes or Jalen Wright to just make so many good things happen on a wrong play, those are scenarios that I think that could really push this offense moving forward. Josh, number 1, can you hear the lawnmower behind me? Hell yeah. So 2, the thing that got me most excited watching Miami's 20-13 win over the Atlanta Falcons. This secondary looks absolutely awesome. At first, I was sitting there and, I casually watched the games with my dad. At first, I thought Ethan Bonner was struggling a little bit. There was that big reception he gave up down the field. But at the end of the play, you kind of saw him complaining to a ref, and I thought, all right, whatever, just get back in the huddle. Like the cornerback complains to a ref, the sky is blue. Those are things that happen. But you did a little research, man, and that one reception that Ethan Bonner gave up on 4 targets probably should have been called for a flag.
Yeah, I saw the same thing you did, Jake, and I immediately thought, okay, what's Ethan Bonner complaining about? I don't even think the announcers really touched on it, and no one, they definitely weren't showing that replay. And then someone posted the All-22, which I was waiting to see, and you can clearly see that he got pulled down. I know some, Twitter scouts and experts and analysts are saying he probably could have used his hands to fight that off, but at the end of the day, he was absolutely yanked down on that huge play he gave up. So I thought Ethan Bonner looked good. It did seem like the Dolphins were, kind of putting him out on an island, maybe even storm duck a little bit to kind of see if the quarterbacks would test their side, and Ethan Bonner stepped up. I mean, you saw those quick feet, you saw his speed on full display. So I think Ethan Bonner's stock's continuing to rise, and that's crazy thinking about how a lot of us are already looking at him as this unicorn. And I know you had Storm Duck on your list, Jake. I mean, he had a couple pass breakups, same deal with him. So I don't know. We can talk about a few other guys too, because that secondary, a lot of young players really stepped up and has me excited, if we're being honest.
Storm Duck's rise has been so awesome. I love that people just have did the AI generators and just put a duck in a storm and put that on Twitter. I've absolutely loved that. Nobody played more defensive snaps than Storm Duck's 53. And that all that considered, he had 3 tackles. He allowed 1 reception on 5 total targets, 1 missed tackle for an undrafted rookie, Josh, on a roster that has Kader Kohu, Nick Needham, 2 former undrafted rookies. This feels like that path for Storm Duck also earning a spot on that 53-man roster, putting him out there for the majority of the game, where an Atlanta Falcons offense that's trying to move the football, like Taylor Heineke, he decided to drop the ball into Isaiah Mack's hands in the first play of the game. But like, he's a veteran quarterback. He's played games in the league. You had Michael Penix Jr. trying to throw the football around. The Falcons wanted to see what they had in him. And just for Ethan Bonner, Storm Duck, 2 guys to absolutely not blink, to allow 2 total receptions on 9 targets, man. I've been probably to the point where it's a little annoying. Like, the Dolphins need help on the boundary. The Dolphins need help on the boundary. These are going to be the 2 guys I'm going to be watching for the rest of camp more than anybody else. Ethan Bonner, Storm Duck, continue this momentum, and I think you guys got spots on the 53.
Yeah, and I mean, I can't wait because you hear what Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill are saying about Ethan Bonner and his progression. Storm Duck, this is a guy who the Dolphins clearly wanted to bring aboard, and we see some of that talent there. Some other guys that really stepped up, and it was early on in the game. I have Saran Neal. He really stepped. He had a forced fumble, a recovery. I have written down 91.7 Pro Football Focus grade. I think he was the highest graded player. They do say he should be fine because he was banged up. And then the guy that really, really, really stood out to me, and I'm sure you have him down as well, Jake. He was not on our list of players to watch, but Patrick McMorris. I mean, this was a player that looked like he was all over the field, man. He was, upending dudes. And I think it's so funny because this was a man who, I believe after the draft, we came on here and we had the Miami Dolphins, draft. They didn't even have a bio on him at the time. That's how, they were still like doing their work. So, I mean, if you needed someone to step up at safety, I mean, this guy looked like he was all over the place, finished with 8 tackles and, definitely flashed out there amongst, some of those guys that you mentioned in secondary. So intrigued to see what he can do as well as, some of those other players. But again, that defense in total, I mean, it just looked different under Anthony Weaver, and you just felt a little bit more excited than you did under, Vic Fangio. Not to knock Vic Fangio anymore.
Oh, we can definitely knock Vic Fangio more. 1,000%. That is something we can do. So McMorris was absolutely awesome. He lit up the stage, tied linebacker Curtis Bolton for the team high in 8 tackles, game high 2 tackles for a loss, and he just had an absolute nose for the football. He allowed 3 receptions, 9 total yards. He did have 1 missed tackle, but when you're talking about 1 miss in 8 tries there, I think for a rookie's first game in the NFL, we'll let that one slide. I think Patrick McMorris proved a lot. He's another player I think that we're gonna have to watch. And Josh, you mentioned Saran Neal, and God, it looked like he brought the entire Buffalo Bills attitude with him. Like, we're talking about Micah Hyde, Jordan Poyer, just the attitude of that Buffalo Bills defense that's given the Dolphins fits for years. Not to get too homerish here, but it felt like Saran Neal, the special teams ace who has played just, I think, 10 to 20 snaps on defense last year, to have that attitude in the secondary, man, is just impressive as hell. Anthony Weaver's defense is very exciting after just 1 game.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because it did feel like, this was a guy that special teams ace, and he just looked like he was out there. And like you mentioned, kind of brought the entire defense together. So absolutely ecstatic for what this defense can be under our, when they get their starters out there, man. I mean, we're stoked on what they did with the players they had out there. And I don't know how much we're going to talk about it, but I just want to throw out Channing Tindall's name, right? I mean, I was looking down at my phone trying to get the kids ready. Yeah, get the kids ready for bed. And it was a nicely timed sack, right? I mean, I think that's what Anthony Weaver's defense, they were throwing different looks at you. They were rotating the safeties post snap. They were doing a lot of nice things, albeit it was a preseason game where they weren't trying to showcase their, show their full toolbox. But Channing Tindall, man, I was a little bit of a coward not to put him on my list, before the game. He absolutely stepped up, and you needed that too with, so many injuries, or at least right now, Jordan Brooks, some of those guys are out. So let's see what Channing Tindall can do the rest of this preseason.
I'll say the game MVP, I want to go Jalen Wright. I just thought he played really well. The offense looked good. I think Saran Neal was the I don't know how to label this award, but when you consider a game where there was like 60 players inactive and a lot of them being starters, Saran Neal looked like he was on a different level where like he probably should have been inactive. He felt like one of the guys who wasn't trying to still learn the game or keeping up. Like he felt like full speed was there to go. Who was probably your highest riser Would you put Channing Tindall there? Is he going to actually be knocking on the door for one of those backup spots here? Or is there somebody else that you just kind of left the game like, damn, like, sorry, son, I didn't respect your game. My mind goes Patrick McMorris.
Yeah, it's hard not to go with Patrick McMorris. It's hard not to want to get stoked about Channing Tindall. I was going to throw out, even like I mentioned earlier, Jack Driscoll. I mean, I think he was playing center at one point. He's, a guy that was battling for the guard spot. So I think he even played a little bit of right tackle with the Philadelphia Eagles. So he's a versatile piece that, I think played better than I expected. Isaiah Mack, you mentioned the fumble recovery. Leonard Payne Jr. I'd written down. I mean, he was flashing a little bit. Neville Gallimore. So there were a lot of guys that really stepped up. And I was like, damn, wasn't familiar with your game. But Patrick McMorris, man, I think that has to be the answer because this dude was everywhere. He was doing everything. And I have to mention that one play, Ethan Bonner blew up his block. It was a screen pass. He blew up the guy. And then you just see Patrick McMorris come in and finish with a German suplex. So those guys are balling, and just a testament to, I guess, how deep this team could be if everyone can stay healthy.
Tanner Connor, he led the team with 70 receiving yards. And the only reason we're mentioning him this late into the show, 36 minutes, I don't want to be a hater. It's nice when you're wide open for a 43-yard reception, which kind of really set the tone. That's what we know Tanner Connor could do that. Like once he has the ball in his hands, he has that breakaway speed, a former track star, and I'm really interested to see if he can maintain himself. PFF did not grade him well in terms of a blocker, and I think in order to stay on the field, you have to see him more. Jody Fortson Jr., man, I was so excited to see him in the red zone, but he was just kind of only used on like a rollout. He had a 12-yard reception. That was about it for the tight ends. Julian Hill, I don't think he saw too much action. I think he's starting to look like one of those guys who's locked up with the roster spot. Anything we missed, Josh? Anything else you want to touch on?
No, I think you pretty much nailed it. I mean, can we talk about Jason Sanders nailing that 58-yarder early on? I mean, I wanted to talk about it with the money sign, but then he absolutely shanked that one later in the game. I joked the Tropical Storm took it. So we saw a little bit of the good and bad from Jason Sanders, but him just coming out there and drilling a 58-yarder like it was nothing. That thing looked like it had 10 more yards to it. So that was nice to see, but then he missed that one later. So I'm a little bit torn there with that one.
I think it was CK Parrott, 3 yards per carry, who mentioned this on Twitter. Did the Dolphins sacrifice their punting game in the sense of Jake Bailey kind of has his struggles at times? I think he started with a couple 40-yard punts. Did they sacrifice the punting game and really go all in just to make sure somebody can snap or hold the ball correctly for Jason Sanders on kicks? Like, is that what happened here, Josh? We've seen Jason Sanders in the last year or so start to regain that money sign. We joked for a couple of years like it was every other year he was good at kicking field goals, and then the next year he'd stink. Coincidentally, the Dolphins never had a consistent punter at the same time. So is this something where they sacrificed it just to make sure they had someone who can hold it properly for Sanders?
I mean, that's at Charlie, right? We're doing that whole little spin.
Yes.
I think so. I think it could be. I mean, we sat here and I went all spin zone and said, I think his best season came when there were no fans in the stadium. So yeah, we can go spin zone and talk about the holder. So yeah, maybe that is what it is, because you're watching Jake Bailey and you're like, come on, man, the dude that's standing outside your camp can't punt that, can't knock one into the 20 like him. So yeah, if that's what it takes, though, to clinch a game against Cowboys, so be it, right? That's what it took last year. All those Jason Sanders field goals.
That is it. That is all the time we have today on Another Dolphins podcast. Josh, this was an absolute blast to do the show with you. The Dolphins are next on the field. They are hosting the Washington Commandos on Saturday. So we have a couple joint practices throughout the week. We have the game. We'll figure out a way to podcast. We'll come back with some news. But thank you all so much for listening. I hope everyone has an awesome week, a wonderful week. We are so much closer to the regular season. We will talk to you soon. But until then, fins up.
Fins up.
Fins up.